A white cop stops a black man outside the courthouse, but what he doesn't know is that this man holds more power in that building than anyone else. The truth? It's about to turn his world upside down. It was a sunny afternoon in downtown Atlanta, and the courthouse steps gleamed white under the bright southern sun. People were spilling out of the building, some clutching folders, others chatting as they descended the marble stairs. Among them was Judge Marcus Hale, a tall, dignified man in his late 50s, dressed in an immaculate navy suit with a burgundy tie. He carried himself with quiet authority, the kind that didn't need to be announced. He had just finished presiding over a difficult case, one that had stirred up plenty of media attention. Marcus was looking forward to heading home, maybe enjoying some time with his daughter before she left for college. But as he walked toward his sleek black sedan parked across the street, he noticed a police cruiser idling near the corner. He didn't think much of it at first. Courthouses were always surrounded by law enforcement, but as he approached his car, the cruiser suddenly rolled forward, blocking his path. A white officer stepped out, tall, broad-shouldered, with a clean-shaven face and sunglasses that reflected the sunlight. "Excuse me, sir," the officer said, his voice clipped and commanding, "I need to see some identification." Marcus raised an eyebrow, puzzled. "Is there a reason for this, officer?" he asked calmly. The man's posture stiffened. "We got a report of a suspicious individual matching your description. Now, ID, please." Around them, a few pedestrians slowed their steps, sensing tension. Marcus was used to moments of mistaken identity when he was younger, but here he was in front of the courthouse where he had worked for over 2 decades, being confronted as though he were a suspect. "I just walked out of that courthouse," Marcus said, his tone still measured. "You might want to double-check your information." But the officer took a step closer, hand resting casually, but not innocently, on the holster of his gun. "Sir, I'm not going to ask you again." Something inside Marcus twisted. He had seen countless cases where situations like this escalated for no reason. He reached slowly into his inner jacket pocket, pulled out his wallet, and handed over his driver's license. The officer took it, glanced down, then up again, but instead of easing, his suspicion seemed to grow. "What's your business here?" he demanded. Marcus could hardly believe what he was hearing. "My business," he said, "is inside that courthouse where I just finished work." A small group of onlookers was gathering now, phones discreetly raised. The officer noticed, but didn't back down. "Work doing what?" he pressed. Marcus let out a small sigh, feeling a mix of irritation and disappointment that this was even happening. "I'm a judge," he said plainly. The officer snorted softly, as if the idea were absurd. "Yeah, prove it." The air thickened. The hum of distant traffic seemed to fade, replaced by the tension in the moment. Marcus stared at the officer for a long moment, wondering how someone could be so willfully blind to reality. "Prove it," he repeated quietly. The officer crossed his arms, his stance wide and assertive. "Yeah, I've heard it all before. People lie." Marcus reached into his leather briefcase, pulling out a thick binder embossed with the state seal. He flipped it open to reveal a page bearing his name, title, and photograph, along with the official stamp of the judiciary. "This is my court docket for today," he said, holding it up so the officer could see. The officer glanced at it briefly, then back at Marcus, unimpressed. "Could be fake," he muttered. At that moment, one of the courthouse security guards, an older black man named Harold who had known Marcus for years, stepped outside, scanning the scene. His eyes widened when he saw Marcus and the officer in a standoff. "Judge Hale," Harold called, striding over quickly. "What's going on here?" The officer stiffened. "You know this man?" Harold gave him a look that could cut glass. "Know him? He's the presiding judge in courtroom 3. Been here longer than you've probably been in uniform." A flicker of uncertainty crossed the officer's face, but he covered it with a tight jaw. "We got a call," he insisted. "Suspicious male near the courthouse. Possible threat." Marcus's voice was steady, but there was steel in it now. "So you stopped the first black man in a suit you saw?" A couple of the bystanders murmured their agreement. The officer shifted uncomfortably but refused to apologize. Instead, he handed back Marcus's ID with a clipped, "You're free to go." Marcus took it without a word, sliding it back into his wallet. He could have walked away right then, but something in him refused to let the moment pass. "Officer," he said, "I've presided over cases that have changed people's lives. I've sentenced criminals, freed the innocent, and upheld the law you swore to protect. Yet, outside the very building where justice is supposed to mean something, I find myself treated like a suspect. That should trouble you." The officer's jaw worked, but he said nothing. Harold stepped in then, placing a firm hand on Marcus's shoulder. "Come on, Judge. You've got nothing to prove here." Marcus finally turned and began walking toward his car, but he knew this encounter wasn't over, not in his mind, and maybe not for the officer either. The crowd slowly dispersed, but a few people kept their cameras rolling, just in case. Marcus sat in his car for a few moments before starting the engine, his hands resting loosely on the steering wheel. He could feel his pulse in his temples, not from fear, but from the sheer frustration of what had just happened. This wasn't the first time he'd been profiled, but it stung more here, right outside the courthouse, where he'd built a career on the principles of fairness and justice. As he took a deep breath and started the car, he saw the officer still standing there, pretending to check his phone, but clearly watching him. Marcus drove away slowly, deliberately, refusing to let the encounter rush him. That evening, at home, Marcus recounted the incident to his daughter, Alana. She was 18, bright, and outspoken, with her father's sharp wit. "You're telling me he still didn't believe you?" After seeing the docket, she said, incredulous. Marcus nodded. "Some people only see what they want to see, Alana. To him, I wasn't a judge. I was just a black man he didn't trust." Alana frowned. "You can't just let that go, Dad. If this happened to you, imagine what happens to people who don't have your position or education." Her words echoed in Marcus's mind long after she'd gone to her room. He knew she was right. The next morning, Marcus returned to the courthouse as usual. He had a full day of hearings, but the encounter with the officer kept tugging at the edges of his thoughts. Midway through the morning session, during a recess, Harold came to his chambers. "Judge, about yesterday," Harold began, closing the door behind him. "That officer? His name's Officer Kent. New to this district. Got a bit of a reputation already, not for violence, but, well, let's just say you're not the first person he's rubbed the wrong way." Marcus leaned back in his chair. "Is that so?" Harold nodded grimly. "I've seen him stop courthouse staff on their way in, asking for ID when he knows they work here. Always the same type, black, Latino, anyone who doesn't fit his idea of belonging." Marcus's jaw tightened. This wasn't just about him anymore. If Kent was doing this to others, it was a pattern, a dangerous one. "Thank you, Harold," Marcus said. "That's useful to know." That afternoon, Marcus stayed late at the courthouse, reviewing case files. Around dusk, he walked out to the parking lot. To his mild surprise, the same officer's cruiser was parked nearby. Kent was leaning against it, scrolling on his phone. As Marcus approached his car, Kent looked up. "Judge Hale," he said flatly without warmth. "Officer Kent," Marcus replied in an equally neutral tone. There was a beat of silence. "I hope there won't be any more misunderstandings between us," Marcus said. Kent gave a tight smile. "Just doing my job, sir." Marcus held his gaze. "So, am I—" He got into his car, but this time he knew he wasn't going to let the matter fade away. At home that night, Marcus began drafting a formal complaint, not out of spite, but out of a sense of duty, to himself, to the people Kent might target next, and to the principles of justice he swore to uphold. He included every detail he could remember: Kent's tone, his refusal to accept multiple forms of identification, the dismissive attitude even after proof was shown. As he typed, he thought about the countless cases where individuals had no one to speak up for them. This time, he could speak. By the time Marcus closed his laptop, it was well past midnight. But he felt a strange calm settle over him. This wasn't over yet, but now he had a plan. The following week, Marcus filed the formal complaint with the department's Internal Affairs Division. He made sure to follow every procedural requirement, knowing that a technical oversight could be used to dismiss the matter. He submitted a written statement, provided copies of the court docket, and even attached still images from bystanders' videos that had surfaced online. The footage clearly showed Kent blocking Marcus's path and ignoring proof of his identity. Marcus didn't expect a swift response. Internal affairs investigations could drag on for months, but word travels fast in a courthouse. By midweek, whispers had already reached him that Kent wasn't happy about the complaint. In fact, one of the clerks overheard him grumbling to another officer about the judge who thinks he's above the law. Rather than avoiding Kent, Marcus went about his business as usual, determined not to show intimidation. On Thursday afternoon, after a long sentencing hearing, Marcus stepped outside for fresh air. Kent was across the street, leaning against his cruiser again, arms folded. Their eyes met briefly. Kent smirked as if to say, "You can't touch me." 2 days later, Marcus was in his chambers when a knock came at the door. It was Captain Reyes from the police department, a seasoned Latina officer with a reputation for fairness. "Judge Hale, may I have a word?" she asked. Marcus gestured to the chair opposite his desk. "Of course." Reyes got straight to the point. "I'm overseeing the preliminary review of your complaint. I've seen the footage. I also know Kent. This isn't the first time he's been the subject of a complaint, though yours is by far the most serious." Marcus listened carefully as she explained that Kent had received multiple warnings for unnecessary stops, though none had been officially sustained due to lack of evidence. This time, Reyes said, "We have evidence, and your credibility as a judge carries weight. But you should know, he's not going to take this lying down." Marcus leaned forward slightly. "I'm not looking for revenge, Captain. I'm looking for accountability." Reyes nodded. "Good, because that's what we intend to pursue." Later that week, Marcus was walking through the courthouse lobby when he overheard Kent speaking loudly to another officer. "Man, this is ridiculous. All I did was ask for ID. If he's so sensitive, maybe he shouldn't be walking around like he owns the place." Marcus paused. His back still turned to them, but his mind sharpened. This wasn't just arrogance. It was a refusal to see the harm in his actions. That night, Alana asked him how things were going. Marcus told her about Captain Reyes and the investigation. "You think they'll actually do something?" she asked. Marcus gave her a small smile. "I think they have to. The truth has a way of coming out, even if it takes time." As the days passed, Marcus began to notice subtle shifts. Officers who usually greeted him casually now offered more formal nods. A few even stopped to quietly express support, saying they'd seen Kent overstep before, but never felt safe reporting it. The more Marcus heard, the clearer it became that this was about more than one bad encounter. It was about changing a culture that allowed it to happen. 3 weeks after Marcus filed the complaint, Captain Reyes called him into the precinct for a formal update. The meeting room was small, with plain white walls and a faint smell of coffee. Reyes sat across from him, a slim file open in front of her. "Judge Hale," she began, "the investigation has concluded. Based on witness statements, video evidence, and prior incidents, We found Officer Kent in violation of departmental policy regarding bias-based policing. Marcus listened without reacting, though inwardly he felt a current of relief. What happens next? He asked. Reyes explained that Kent would face a 30-day suspension without pay, mandatory bias training, and a probationary period during which any further incidents could result in termination. Some might say it's not enough, she added, but it's a step, and it's on his record now. Marcus nodded slowly. He wasn't naive enough to think this would change Kent overnight, but it was a public acknowledgement that his actions were unacceptable. Thank you, Captain, he said sincerely. As he left the precinct, the air outside felt a little lighter, though he knew the work wasn't over. The next morning, Marcus arrived at the courthouse as usual. This time, Kent wasn't outside. In his place stood a younger officer Marcus didn't recognize, who greeted him with a polite "Good morning, sir." Marcus returned the greeting and went inside, heading straight to his chambers. By midday, word of Kent's suspension had spread through the building. Some reacted with surprise, others with quiet satisfaction. Harold stopped by during lunch, carrying 2 sandwiches from the cafe down the street. Heard the news, Harold said with a grin. You did more than stand up for yourself, Judge. You made it a little easier for the rest of us. Marcus smiled. That was the point. A few hours later, as Marcus stepped out of the courthouse, he was surprised to see Kent himself walking toward him from across the street. He was in plain clothes now, jeans and a jacket, but his expression was tense. Marcus braced himself for a confrontation, but when Kent reached him, he hesitated. Judge Hale, Kent began, his voice lower than usual, I came to say, I didn't handle that day right. Marcus studied him for a moment. No, you didn't, he replied evenly. Kent shifted his weight, looking down briefly before meeting Marcus's eyes again. I'm not saying I agree with everything in that report, but I've been thinking maybe I've been looking at people the wrong way. Marcus didn't rush to fill the silence. Finally, he said, acknowledging that is a start, but understanding why it's wrong, that's what will make the difference. Kent gave a small nod, then turned and walked away. Marcus watched him go, unsure if the man would truly change, but hopeful that the seed had been planted. That weekend, Marcus and Alana sat on the porch at home, sipping iced tea in the warm afternoon. Alana had been following the case closely, asking for updates every few days. So is it over? She asked. Marcus thought for a moment before answering. For now, he said, but there's always another fight. This was just one. Alana smiled, faintly. At least this time, the good guys won. Marcus chuckled softly. Justice isn't about winning, Alana. It's about making sure the truth matters, even when it's inconvenient. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the sun dip toward the horizon. Marcus felt the tension of the past weeks easing out of his shoulders. He knew the world wasn't suddenly fairer because of one disciplinary action. But he also knew that moments like this, standing up, speaking out, were how change began. And if he had to, he'd do it all over again. A few days later, Marcus was back in court, presiding over a high-profile case. As he read the verdict, he glanced briefly toward the gallery. Among the faces, he noticed the young officer who had replaced Kent on courthouse duty. Their eyes met, and the officer gave a small nod of respect. Marcus returned it subtly before turning back to the bench. He didn't need applause or grand gestures. The real victory was knowing that, in this small corner of the justice system, fairness had taken a step forward. When court adjourned, Marcus walked outside, the crisp morning air carrying a sense of renewal. People passed by, each with their own battles and burdens, most of them unaware of what had unfolded here in recent weeks. But Marcus was keenly aware, and as he unlocked his car, he caught his reflection in the window, steady, unshaken, and ready for whatever came next.